Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. Against the bruised canvas of encroaching night, the old ironworks sprawled, a skeletal behemoth breathing decay. Its shattered panes glittered like vacant sockets, hoarding shadows I was soon to trespass upon. Wrestling the rusted shackle on the perimeter fence, I felt a tremor, not of cold, but of premonition. Ignorance blissfully unaware that this inaugural shift as custodian of emptiness would hurl me against perils starkly human and perhaps shadowed by whispers of the other. My name is Leo, etched onto a contract signed from the lean edge of necessity. Our town choked on economic dust, and with new life swelling within my wife, the luxury of choice had evaporated. The advert, night watchman, Blackwood Ironworks derelict, shimmered like a mirage of simple wages. 8 hours guarding ghosts and echoes, a fool's paradise I'd soon learn. The gate yielded with a tortured metallic sigh, admitting me to the blighted grounds. Years silenced the clang and roar, the workforce phantoms dispersed on the winds of closure. Now it served as a ruinous playground for trespassers and thrill-seekers, the scant wisdom imparted during my perfunctory briefing. My torch carved a nervous swath through the gloom towards the gatehouse security post. A cell, more than an office, furnished sparsely. A desk scarred with neglect, a complaining chair, a bank of archaic monitors that stuttered into grainy monochrome life at my touch. Most screens wept static, blind eyes on the network, but a few offered fractured glimpses of deserted thoroughfares and spectral production lines. I surrendered to the chair's weary embrace, the pervasive scent of mildew and stagnation clinging like a shroud. The shift's initial hours unspooled in quietude, a rhythm established between the flickering monitors and patrols across the ground level. My own footfalls, the loudest occupants of the echoing immensity. Only the furtive scrabble of unseen rodents or the groan of the structure settling punctuated the silence. Then, near the second hour past midnight, it came. A dense impact, a muffled weight dropped somewhere above. I froze, the beam of my light jittering across stained concrete, seeking an origin. Loose timber, maybe, I whispered, the lie thin against the sudden hammering in my chest. Duty demanded investigation, yet the thought of ascending into that deeper darkness coiled dread in my gut. My hand found the reassuring bulk of the stun gun clipped to my belt, a meager talisman against the unknown, and I forced my legs towards the stairwell. Each tread on the warped wooden stairs announced my ascent with a protesting shriek, amplifying the adrenaline coursing through me. The second floor lay steeped in profounder shadow, moonlight struggling feebly through grime-caked apertures. And there, a flicker, a disturbance at the corridor's terminus. My light lunged towards it, but the shape, whatever it was, had already dissolved around the bend. "Identify yourself," my voice, striving for authority, cracked slightly. "Security, show yourself now." Only silence answered, thick and watchful, then undeniably footfalls, not advancing but retreating, drawing me further into the factory's labyrinthine heart. Curiosity, that treacherous impulse, began to eclipse fear. Rounding the corner, I caught a fleeting impression of a figure slipping through a doorway into what was once an administrative office. Human, yes, but possessing a disconcerting fluidity of movement. "Hold it right there," I yelled, breaking into a clumsy run. I burst into the office. Empty. Or so it seemed. A scuffle behind me spun me around. From the lee of a skeletal filing cabinet, a man emerged. As the torchlight pinned him, stark horror bloomed. He wasn't solitary. Two more shapes materialized from the gloom, their eyes catching the light like predatory embers. "Well now," the first man rasped, his voice like grinding stones. "Looks like the Night Watch decided to watch." I retreated a step, my grip tightening on the stun gun. "Armed security," I declared, injecting a confidence I didn't possess. "Vacate the premises now." A harsh bark of laughter echoed unnervingly. "Not happening, friend. We got ourselves a little enterprise going here. Can't have you throwing a wrench in the works." My vision, adjusting, began to resolve the scene. The office, repurposed. Glassware, tubing, canisters I couldn't name littered every surface. An acrid chemical tang burned the air. Realization struck cold and sharp. A clandestine laboratory, narcotics. I'd walked right into their nest. "Look," I began, raising a placating hand. "No trouble needed. Let's just forget this happened." I saw nothing. The leader, his posture radiating menace, slowly shook his head. "Too late for blind eyes, pal. You've seen the setup." A subtle nod, and his companions began to angle outwards, flanking me. Trapped, 3-1 on their turf. Instinct screamed the only viable option: flight. I exploded from the office, boots hammering the decaying floorboards, the sounds of pursuit erupting behind me. Reaching the stairwell, a backward glance confirmed the nightmare. The cold gleam of metal in one pursuer's hand. A blade, a firearm, no time to discern. I plunged down the stairs, stumbling, nearly pitching headlong in my desperate haste. The security office, the landline. My mobile was a useless brick in this concrete tomb. Hitting the ground floor, I sprinted, the shouts of the men echoing from the stairwell behind. I slammed the office door, ramming the protesting chair beneath the knob. A fragile barrier against imminent violence. Fingers trembling, I snatched the receiver, punching 911. As the call connected, the door shuddered under a heavy impact. The chair groaned. 911, state your emergency. Blackwood Ironworks, security. I choked out the words. Intruders, trying to kill me, send help. I spat out the address. The dispatcher's calm assurance, a distant counterpoint to the rising panic. Hanging up felt like severing a lifeline. The door bucked again. The chair splintered. My eyes darted wildly, seeking any advantage, any weapon. The monitor bank. An idea, desperate and crude, sparked. I ripped the heaviest screen free, trailing wires like severed nerves. Just as the door splintered inward, I swung the monitor with every ounce of strength. It met the leader's skull with a sickening thud. He crumpled, his accomplices tripping over his falling form in their rush to breach the tiny space. I didn't pause. Using the monitor like a shield, a battering ram, I shoved past the momentarily stunned figures. They recoiled, giving me the sliver of opportunity I needed. I ran with lungs burning, feet pounding, propelled by primal terror, out of the suffocating structure and into the blessedly cool night. Distant sirens grew rapidly louder, a promise of rescue. I didn't stop until I hit the gate, tearing it open and spilling onto the street as the first flashing blue lights rounded the corner. The hours that followed dissolved into a haze. Police questions, paramedic checks. The authorities secured the lab, apprehending 2 of the men. The leader, however, had vanished into the chaos. As dawn painted the sky in bruised pastels, I sat on the curb, wrapped in a shock blanket, watching the methodical crawl of investigators over the ironworks. My wife arrived, her face a mask of fear, and I pulled her close, feeling the gentle curve of her belly, the life within grounding me. I relinquished the security position that very morning. No paycheck could justify that proximity to oblivion, could outweigh the future cradled in my arms. Yet the night left its mark, indelible. It taught me the fragility of safety, the razor-thin membrane between the mundane and mortal peril. Months later, rocking my newborn daughter, the memory of the ironworks would surface unbidden. I had confronted terror, navigated danger through sheer will, and endured. Gazing into her innocent eyes, I knew I possessed a resilience I hadn't understood before. Still, sleep sometimes offers no refuge. In the deepest quiet of the night, phantom steps echo in the hall, and shadows in the room's corners take on fleeting, menacing shapes. The ironworks may stand silent miles away, but its ghosts remain. Tethered to the memory of the night, I stared down true fear and somehow walked away. That sound against the glass, a dry, insistent skittering, was no errant branch. I knew because the pines stood sentinel still beyond the pane, their boughs stark silhouettes against a wash of moonlight, like fossilized lightning frozen against the velvet dark. This wasn't the wind's idle play, it was purposeful, a needle scratching vinyl, growing sharper. I'd sought refuge in this timber frame box, this cabin nestled deep in the woods, craving an escape from the city's relentless thrum, yearning for stillness. Now, rigid in the narrow bed, senses straining into the profound hush, I understood the forest's true quiet and how swiftly it could be fractured. Only yesterday, arrival had felt like stepping into a sun-drenched idyll. The afternoon light, thick and golden, had slanted through the trees, perfuming the air with resin and damp earth. The cabin itself, weathered planks and a welcomingly broad porch, promised precisely the solitude advertised. Miles lay between me and the nearest soul, cocooning me in acres of whispering woods and the intermittent trill of unseen birds. I'd spent hours unpacking the car, charting nearby game trails, simply breathing the untainted air. As dusk bled into night, I'd settled before the hearth, book in hand, the fire's soft pops and the drone of nocturnal insects, a welcome symphony replacing sirens and shouts. The first tremor of unease arrived subtly, just as I prepared for sleep, a prickle climbing my spine, the phantom sensation of eyes upon me. Absurd, I chided myself, utterly alone. Nothing lurked here but shadows and solitude, yet now, snapped awake in the pit of night, that fleeting discomfort returned, magnified into a suffocating certainty. The skittering ceased. Silence rushed back in, heavier now, only to be broken by something worse. The distinct crunch of boots on the gravel path outside. My breath hitched. I fought the frantic drumming against my ribs. An animal, surely? A foraging deer, perhaps a curious black bear common to these tracks? The footfalls paced, unhurried, methodical, circling the cabin's perimeter. A pause at each window. Was that breathing? A low, guttural exhalation, impossibly close. My hand, trembling violently, groped for the phone on the bedside table. It nearly slipped from my grasp. Predictably, inevitably, no service. The nearest signal tower was a distant rumor. The footsteps had completed their circuit, landing now on the front porch. Ancient floorboards groaned beneath a substantial weight. Paralysis wouldn't save me. Lying here, waiting for what? The thought was a black hole I refused to fall into. Inch by agonizing inch, I eased from the bed. The bare wood shocked my feet with its cold as I ghosted towards the bedroom door. Opening it elicited the faintest betrayal from the hinges. Moonlight silvered the main room, transforming familiar furniture into hunched, unfamiliar shapes. My gaze fixed on the front door, throat tight. Near it, incongruously tucked into an umbrella stand, stood a baseball bat I'd noticed earlier. Odd placement, I'd thought then. Now it felt like providence. My fingers closed around the smooth, worn timber, its heft a small anchor in the rising tide of fear. The porch fell silent again, a heavy, expectant quiet. I pressed my ear flat against the door, listening until my own pulse roared. Nothing. Had it departed? Had exhaustion conjured the entire ordeal? Just as relief began to tentatively unspool, I heard it. A soft thump, like something weighty being carefully set down, followed unmistakably by the slow, deliberate rotation of the doorknob. I recoiled, bat raised high, unlocked. In my blissful embrace of rustic tranquility, the simple act of securing the door hadn't even crossed my mind. Agonizingly slow, the door began to swing inward, a sliver of night, widening to reveal nothing, only the empty frame, the porch beyond bathed in indifferent moonlight. I stood frozen, weapon poised, staring into the void. The crickets had ceased their chirping. The entire forest seemed to hold its collective breath. An eternity condensed into seconds before I lowered the bat, taking a hesitant step. I had to know. Peering out onto the porch, empty. Another step, bringing me fully into the cool night air, gooseflesh prickling my arms. Left, right, only shifting shadows and the stark lunar glow. As I turned to retreat, my eye snagged on something at the porch edge, barely discernible. Footprints, not the splayed tracks of deer or bear I'd desperately hoped for. These were undeniably, chillingly human. My breath snagged. Kneeling, I saw they were fresh, the disturbed earth still dark and damp, and large, far larger than my own. My gaze traced their path backward from the woods, onto the porch boards, and then my blood turned to ice water. The prints led directly, unerringly, to my bedroom window. With shaking hands, I activated my phone's flashlight. The beam sliced the darkness, illuminating the cabin's flank. More prints clustered beneath the window, and something else, gouged into the wood, long and deep, right where the glass met the frame. Scratches. I stumbled back, Mind fractured. This wasn't paranoia, it was real. I had to leave, now. Scrambling back inside, I slammed the door, the bolt sliding home with a decisive thunk. A frantic dash to the bedroom, pulling on clothes haphazardly, jamming my feet into hiking boots. As my fingers closed around the car keys on the dresser, the sound returned. Footsteps on the porch, not stealthy now, running. I threw myself at the back door, wrenched it open, and plunged into the absolute black beneath the trees. Heavy breathing pursued me, the snap of twigs underfoot terrifyingly close. I ran blindly, lungs searing, branches lashing my face, driven by pure primal terror. Directionless, knowing only a way. After what felt like an age but was likely mere moments, I erupted from the tree line onto the gravel track where my car waited, a pale metallic promise under the moon. Keys fumbled in my slick palm. Behind me, something substantial crashed through the undergrowth, closing the distance. The key found the lock. I flung the door open, hurled myself inside, and slammed it shut just as a towering, broad silhouette broke from the trees. The key jammed into the ignition. A silent, fervent prayer. The engine caught, roared. I stomped the accelerator. Gravel sprayed as the car fishtailed away. A final, horrifying glimpse in the rearview mirror. The tall figure standing motionless in the center of the track, watching me vanish. I didn't ease off the gas until the blessed glow of highway lamps appeared. The sight of other vehicles a balm to my frayed nerves. I drove straight through the remaining night, not stopping until the familiar concrete embrace of the city surrounded me. I never filed a report. Who would lend credence to such a tale? No evidence remained, save for a narrative that sounded unhinged, even whispered to myself. Yet sometimes when the night deepens and the wind sighs through the urban canyons, I remember the rasping at the window, the pacing tread on the porch, the shape receding in the mirror. And I'm left to wonder, what if sleep hadn't released me? What if I dismissed the sound? What truly stalked those woods? And what did it want? That cabin remains a place I'll never revisit, but a sliver of certainty lodges deep within me. Whatever shared the darkness with me that night persists, dwelling in the forest's shadowed heart, awaiting the next unsuspecting soul who lowers their guard, forgets a simple lock, mistakes the feeling of being watched for mere fancy, because the monsters sometimes are terrifyingly real, and sometimes they leave footprints. This building, I thought I knew its bones. 4 stories of weary architecture, its stairwells sighing underfoot, walls shedding paint like old skin, 2 flats per floor, hallways draped in a perpetual twilight, and a front door that issued a low moan with every entry and exit. A place where lives ran parallel, rarely intersecting, yet a peculiar sense of sanctuary had always permeated its aged corridors, until the man appeared before apartment 302. My first glimpse came in the pre-dawn chill. My workday commences obscenely early, often before 5 a.m. The lift, a temperamental beast, was predictably dormant, forcing me onto the stairs. Ascending past the 2nd floor, my gaze snagged on him as I neared the landing between 3rd and 4th. A silhouette stationed near the threshold of 302. A worn baseball cap shadowed his face. Twin plastic sacks dangled from his grip. His posture radiated stillness, an unnerving tableau of waiting. Unwilling to seem discourteous in the gloom, I offered a clipped "morning." Silence answered. He didn't stir, didn't acknowledge my presence. A beat of hesitation, perhaps headphones. No wires betrayed their use. "Morning?" I tried again, louder this time. Nothing. A shrug, a quick pivot towards the exit. The bus wouldn't wait. The encounter dissolved into the urgency of my commute. That evening, Silas, our building sentinel behind the lobby desk, delivered words that coiled cold in my gut. "Did someone finally take 302? I asked casually. He furrowed his brow. "No, Alara, still vacant, months now. Owners trying to sell, but no takers. Why?" I recounted the morning's strange sentinel, Silas's expression clouded with puzzlement. "Odd. Logged no visitors for that unit. Last viewing was weeks back. Maybe a neighbor's guest got turned around." I had no explanation. Murmuring goodnight, I ascended to my fourth-floor refuge. The third-floor corridor stretched empty and silent beneath the weak bulbs. No phantom figures, no disquieting sounds near 302. Yet, as sleep eluded me, the image persisted. The capped man, the plastic bags, the impenetrable silence. Weeks spun by, work consuming my thoughts, blurring the memory. Then, one Wednesday, another bleary 5 a.m. departure. Hurrying, sleep still clinging to me, I passed the third floor. And there he was. Same spot, same stillness. This time, resolve hardening. I projected my voice. "Hey, you live here?" No reaction. Head bowed, the cap's brim obscuring everything above his chin. The plastic bags rested at his feet, a faint, dull clink, like cans or metal shifting inside, sounded as he subtly adjusted his weight. I edged closer. Everything all right? My tone was clear, insistent. Was he unwell, lost? Slowly, agonizingly, his head swiveled towards me. Yet the cap, coupled with the corridor's anemic light, kept his face a geography of shadow. He seemed to fix his gaze on me, though certainty was impossible. Then, without uttering a sound, he stepped backward, turned the knob on 302's door, slipped inside, and shut it. The distinct click of a lock engaging echoed in the stillness. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through my stomach. That apartment was empty, stripped bare. No power, no furniture, nothing. A prickling sensation crawled up my arms. This wasn't right. I stood frozen, mind racing. Work beckoned, yet this felt wrong, deeply wrong. Finally, I scrambled down to the lobby. Silas was there. Breathlessly, I relayed what I'd witnessed. The man, the entry, the locking of the door from within. Silas shook his head, adamant. "Impossible, Alara. No electricity up there. Realtor handed me the keys last month. It's completely cleared out. Come on, let's look." We rode the groaning, rattling lift to the third floor, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Squatter? Intruder? Danger? Sweat slicked my palms. I wiped them uselessly on my trousers. The third-floor hallway was deserted. 302's door appeared undisturbed, no marks of forced entry. Silas cycled through his keys until one slid home. We stepped into absolute darkness, pierced only by the beam of his phone's flashlight. The living area gaped, vacant. Bare walls, naked windows devoid of blinds or curtains. The kitchen held only a disconnected, hulking refrigerator. Both bedroom doors stood ajar, revealing equally empty spaces. No man, no plastic bags, no disturbance in the thin layer of dust coating the floorboards. The hairs on my nape prickled. I prowled the rooms, instinctively opening a closet, flicking a useless light switch. Nothing. The circuit breaker was off, the power severed. I met Silas's gaze. His unease mirrored my own as his light swept every barren corner. "Weird," he muttered. "You're positive you saw him come in here?" I nodded, my throat constricting. I mentioned the lock clicking. He tested the deadbolt from the inside. It functioned perfectly, undamaged. We retreated, locking the void behind us, and descended back to the lobby's relative normalcy. He promised vigilance, a call to the realtor. Work that day was a fog. The image replayed relentlessly, the slow turn of the shadowed head, the closing door, the click. Afterwards, the third floor became forbidden territory. My apartment sat one flight above, but I favored the lift. Or if stairs were unavoidable, I'd practically sprint past 302's door, eyes averted. Self-doubt gnawed, imagination, a trick of the dim light, yet conviction held firm. Several nights later, returning near midnight, exhaustion and a foul mood my companions after a brutal day, I found the lift predictably out of order. The stairwell beckoned, dim and flickering, my feet dragged. A faint noise drifted from above, a footstep. I froze, heart leaping, listening intently. Silence, paranoia, I chided myself. I climbed to the second landing, then the third. As my foot hit the third floor landing, I stopped dead. A scraping sound emanated from inside 302, like furniture dragged across floorboards, except there was no furniture. Clammy dread seized me. I wanted to flee upwards, but felt rooted to the spot, my chest tight. Then another sound, soft tapping, rhythmic, against the wall. The door, lacking a peephole, offered no clues. I took a hesitant step closer, and instantly, silence fell. Pulse frantic, I broke the paralysis and bolted up the final flight, fumbling with my keys, locking myself securely inside. Sleep was a tormented, restless affair, punctuated by the memory of that impossible scraping. Morning found me downstairs, relaying the night's events to a concerned Silas. He'd spoken to the realtor. No one held keys besides them and the distant owner. No viewings scheduled. He offered another inspection, but I declined. The thought of entering that vacant space again sending a chill deep into my bones. Better to forget, I insisted, though the knot in my stomach disagreed. From then on, passing the third floor became an exercise in hyper-vigilance. Sometimes blessed silence reigned. Other times, a soft thump, a faint rustle, the whisper of movement. Once, the distinct, acrid tang of cigarette smoke, though the hallway remained empty. I mentioned it to a neighbor who merely shrugged. She rarely left her flat. Another resident, newly moved in, heard nothing amiss. The isolation amplified the fear. Was I losing my grip? One evening, phone clutched tight, I decided to capture proof. Voice memo recording, I ascended slowly, holding the device near 302's door. Only my own breathing and the low hum of the ancient light fixture filled the initial seconds. Then, faint but distinct, a creak. Old building settling or something closer, heavier. The sound of weight shifting on aged floorboards within. My heart pounded. I retreated before hearing more. Later, listening back, the creak was undeniably there, yet subtle, ambiguous. Not the concrete evidence I craved, but chilling nonetheless. A few days later, another pre-dawn start, around 4 a.m. Half-conscious, rushing for the bus. Stepping from my apartment, a sense of movement below snagged my attention. too early for most neighbors. I descended quietly, reaching the third-floor landing. I saw it, a faint outline coalescing at the corridor's far end. The familiar shape, capped head, something held in its hands. My heart seized. He stood utterly still. The hallway light flickered erratically for a moment, and when it steadied, he was gone. Vanished. Not retreated, simply. Absent. Adrenaline surged, a physical blow to my chest. My breath hitched. Keys nearly slipped from my grasp. I fled downward, stumbling, reaching the lobby breathless. Silas was at his post. Words failed me, mouth dry as dust. A jerky nod was all I could manage before escaping into the pre-dawn street. Returning that evening, unease settled the moment I entered the building. Mail collected, I approached the lift. Miraculously, it responded. Relief washed over me as I pressed 4. The doors slid shut. The ascent began. No dreaded walk past the third floor tonight. But then, the lift shuddered to a halt at the third floor, unbidden. My stomach plummeted. The doors opened onto the dim, silent corridor. Empty. I jabbed frantically at the close door button. An eternity passed before it obeyed. The lift continued its journey, but my pulse raced long after I'd locked myself inside my own apartment. Since that night, avoidance has become my strategy. I take the stairs only in the company of others, or wait, however long, for the lift. If it stops on 3, my finger stays welded to the close door button, eyes fixed forward. I refuse to look, yet the sounds persist. Faint footfalls, a rustle like dry leaves, the occasional rattle of 302's doorknob. Gooseflesh rises every time. Old buildings groan, I tell myself. Old buildings have voices, but they don't explain the man I saw twice. They don't explain him unlocking an empty, powerless apartment. They don't explain the chilling certainty sometimes that eyes watch me from that shadowed doorway as I hurry past. Distraction is a flimsy shield. Work, chores, the tension remains, a low thrum beneath the surface. A friend suggested moving, finances forbid it, and the idea feels like surrender. Yet every entry into this building is now fraught. I scan corners, peer up stairwells. Silas has accompanied me on further checks of 302. Always the same, empty, dust undisturbed save for our own tracks. Windows latched from within, counters bare, no sign of habitation. But the absence of proof doesn't negate the sounds in the night. It doesn't erase the phantom silhouette burned into my memory. There is no neat conclusion, no tidy explanation, only this lingering dread. I shun the third floor, yet sometimes the building dictates my path. Sometimes I must traverse that hallway where the impossible happened. Each time my stomach clenches, the skin on my arms tightens, and I quicken my pace, desperate to escape the unseen. Whatever resides or seems to reside in apartment 302, I know what I saw. I know what I hear. It might sound irrational, but it is my reality now. If I ever leave this place, it will be because of that door and the silence and sounds behind it. For now, I endure. Passing by, senses screaming, I listen for him. Sometimes a flicker of movement teases the edge of my vision. Sometimes nothing. Either way, I keep moving. Discovering the truth behind 302 holds no appeal if it costs what little peace I have left. Better to pretend it's just an empty room, even as the floorboards above it creak in the dead of night, a sound I attribute with dwindling conviction only to my imagination. Deep down, something is there, unseen, unexplained. Its electric heart pulsed, a sickly violet sign staining my windshield. Agnes's place. Roadside apparitions had dissolved into a hypnotic stream for miles, yet this one snagged my gaze. Perhaps the stuttering neon, perhaps the profound exhaustion demanding caffeine. But some unseen current tugged the wheel, guiding me onto the crunching gravel. No other headlights had pierced the oppressive dark for what felt like an eternity. The highway, an obsidian artery through nowhere, stretched infinitely behind and ahead. Through the diner's windows, squares of unsettling warmth punctuated the void. Dim shapes occupied booths within. A fragile solace. I wasn't utterly alone in this sprawling night. A discordant chime announced my entrance as the door yielded, releasing a wave of heated air. It carried the scent of scorched coffee and lingering fat, a perfume both nostalgic and fundamentally wrong, clinging like a shroud. Behind the counter, a woman's head snapped up, her smile immediate, vast, sculpted as if awaiting this precise moment. "Evening sugar," she crooned, the sweetness thick as syrup. "Just your lonesome self tonight?" A silent nod was my reply. I slid into a booth near the window, the crimson vinyl groaning beneath me. An unnatural quiet pressed in. Diners hummed, a low thrum of clattering plates, percolating coffee, a staticky radio whispering tunes. This place held only silence, a profound vacuum that made the ears ache. Perhaps 4 other souls dotted the room, yet an unnerving quality adhered to them. No food graced their tables, no murmured conversation, no idle scrolling on phones. They simply sat. Motionless effigies, gazes locked on some unseen point straight ahead. The woman, Agnes, the sign proclaimed, floated over with a menu, though its contents were irrelevant. "Coffee?" I managed, striving to ignore the relentless curve of her lips as she retreated. My attention snagged on the man in the opposing booth. His hands lay flat on the formica, utterly still. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed directly on me. A prickle of unease traced my spine. I shifted, attempting to deflect his stare, but it felt tangible, a physical weight boring into my skull. Agnes returned, the mug landing with a soft, definitive clink. I manufactured a polite smile. It felt brittle, ill-fitting. The entire establishment felt askew, like navigating a dreamscape where the familiar had been subtly, dreadfully warped. "Where you pointed?" she inquired, lingering, her presence an unwelcome anchor. "Passing through," I murmured, lifting the mug. The coffee was acrid, barely warm, yet thirst wasn't the point. Escape was. She inclined her head, a slow, knowing gesture. Don't get many wanderers this deep in the night. My gaze drifted to the window, a silent plea for her departure. Beyond the glass, my car sat isolated in the meager spill of light. Past that, only impenetrable blackness reigned. No structures, no street lamps, just the asphalt ribbon dissolving into the void. The diner's silence deepened, becoming a pressure against my eardrums. Risking another glance around the room, my stomach clenched. They were all watching me now. Every single patron, their faces impassive masks, their collective stare an intense, unwavering beam. I dropped my eyes to the murky coffee, concentrating on the rhythm of my own unsteady breath. Fatigue, surely. Road hypnosis, my mind conjuring phantoms. But when I looked up, their eyes remained fastened upon me. "Everything satisfactory, sugar?" Agnes's voice, sharp beside me, made me flinch. She stood behind the counter again, hands planted, observing me with an unnerving focus. "Fine," I croaked, the words shaky. "Think I'll just settle up." Her smile held, but a glacial shift occurred in her eyes. She remained rooted. "You certain? Not tempted by a slice of our pie? It's renowned." "No, thank you, really." I pushed myself upright, reaching for my jacket, the motion abrupt. Turning towards the entrance, my breath hitched. The door wasn't just closed, it was secured. A thick, greasy chain snaked through the handles, bound by a heavy padlock I hadn't registered upon entering. My throat went dry. I pivoted back to Agnes. Why is the door locked?" She didn't respond immediately, the smile unwavering, a mask of benign normalcy. "Oh, that? Just a precaution, dearie, for your safety. You know how it is, strange types out on these roads after dark." A step back. My pulse hammered against my ribs. "I need to leave now." Agnes tilted her head, the smile a fixture. "But you haven't finished your coffee." My eyes darted frantically, seeking another egress. The other patrons were still statues, their gazes pinning me. My hands trembled, but I forced steadiness into my voice. "Unlock the door, please." Ignoring me, Agnes drifted towards the counter, picking up an old rotary phone. She cradled the receiver, her eyes never leaving mine. "Best let our friend know you've arrived. He'll be wanting to meet you." No more waiting. I lunged towards the back, propelled by raw instinct, praying for another way out. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm as I pushed through swinging doors, into the kitchen's thick miasma of stale grease and something vaguely spoiled. A narrow corridor stretched beyond, culminating in a door stenciled "Exit." Relief surged, sharp and painful. I hurled myself towards it, hand outstretched, grabbing the handle, and met solid resistance. Locked, bolted just like the front. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I hammered on the wood, a futile battery against the silence, knowing miles of emptiness lay beyond. Turning, back pressed against the unyielding door, I gasped for air. Then I heard it, footsteps, measured, unhurried, echoing down the confined space. It was one of the men from the booths, the one who had sat nearest. He advanced, face utterly blank, eyes locked onto mine with chilling vacancy. "Agnes says you're to come back now," he stated, his voice toneless, devoid of inflection. Scrabbling backward, my hands searched desperately for a weapon, finding only smooth wall and dead air. There was nowhere to go. Dodging past him, I fled back towards the main diner, a wild hope sparking, find something heavy, smash the lock. But Agnes stood waiting by the chained door. Her smile had finally evaporated, replaced by an expression of flat, cold authority. "You won't be leaving," she stated, her voice low and final. "Not until he gets here. Might as well take a seat." The room seemed to tilt, vision tunneling. Without conscious thought, I seized a nearby chair, hefted it high, and brought it down against the plate glass window. The explosion of shattering glass was deafening, momentarily stunning the oppressive silence. I didn't pause, Scrambling through the jagged opening, feeling shards slice into my hands, I sprinted for the car. Sweat slicked my palms as I fumbled the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Tires spat gravel. I slammed the accelerator, launching the car back onto the highway, away from that island of false light. Only when Agnes's place was a receding memory, finally devoured by the ravenous dark, did I dare glance in the rearview mirror. I drove until the first hints of dawn bruised the eastern horizon, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, hands aching from the relentless grip. Who he was, what fate awaited me within those walls, remains an unanswered horror. But sometimes late at night on a desolate stretch of road, the glow of a distant diner will trigger a phantom echo. The vacant stares, Agnes's too wide smile. I never stop at roadside diners anymore, no matter how deep the exhaustion, no matter how inviting the light. My life was a fortress, its digital and physical walls meticulously guarded, passcodes coiled like serpents around my phone. Correspondence met the shredder's teeth moments after reading. Computer screens remained veiled sanctuaries. This meticulous privacy was my nature, the architecture of my solitude. Then came the acquisition of this archaic manor, perched skeletal on its hill behind iron tendrils weeping rust. Isolation I'd anticipated, silence I'd craved. What I found instead was an unnerving sense of observation, emanating from something unseen, intangible. Weeks now I've inhabited this place. The previous custodian had fled, it seemed, mid-breath, leaving behind a mausoleum of furniture, funereal draperies and mirrors. An astonishing proliferation of mirrors. Every chamber possessed at least one. Many hosted a silent, reflective populace. Floor-standing giants in somber wood frames stood sentinel. Others, rimmed in chipped gilt, clung to walls like faded portraits. Sleek, unadorned panes offered stark, modern counterpoints. That inaugural evening, traversing the foyer into the cavernous living room, I coaxed life into a tall lamp. Its bulb sputtered a hesitant pulse before bathing the space in amber. Above the hearth, a looking glass, scarred by time, held my reflection. Normal enough, I reasoned, dismissing the prickle on my neck as the mere strangeness of inhabiting such vast, vacant space. Ancient floorboards groaned underfoot, protesting my intrusion. The air hung thick with the scent of dust and forgotten time. Then a delicate tapping, sharp as a fingernail drawn across glass, brittle and brief. A scan of the room revealed nothing. A branch, perhaps, rapping at a window pane, I told myself. Morning arrived with a crick in my neck, courtesy of a bed too grand, a mattress harboring lumps like buried secrets. Parting the heavy bedroom curtains, I let the dawn spill in. It struck the large mirror opposite, and for a heart-stopping instant, a shape flickered behind my reflected form. An incongruity, a silhouette that bled beyond my own. I spun, finding only empty air. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A clammy coolness bloomed on my palms. A trick of the light, I insisted internally, descending the stairs towards the promise of coffee, shaking off the residue of unease. The day became a cartographer's task, mapping the mansion's labyrinthine expanse. Corridors unspooled like unwound thread, doors divulging dusty storage closets and forgotten chambers, Each space invariably held its mirror, diminutive ovals leaning nonchalantly in corners, tall rectangles shrouded in spectral sheets, ornate frames writhing with carved flora and Baroque swirls. The count became futile. Dozens, surely, perhaps scores. Unveiling each one sent a jolt, a nervous anticipation of something leaping forth. It never did, yet every encounter with my own duplicated image left a residue of disquiet. Dinner was a solitary affair in the kitchen, a simple meal at a small table. Even here, a mirror presided above the sink, reflecting cabinetry, a slice of the stove. Raising a glass of water, my gaze met the reflection. Movement, not mine. A subtle peripheral slide within the glass while I remained utterly still. My hand spasmed, water sloshing onto the counter. Leaning closer, heart accelerating, I found only the mundane tableau of the kitchen returned. Normalcy asserted itself on the surface, though my pulse refused to slow. I mopped the spill, determinedly banishing the incident from thought. Nightfall found me supine in bed, staring at the ceiling's intricate plasterwork, the bedside lamp defiantly lit against the oppressive dark. The house sighed around me, settling creaks, muffled thuds like distant heartbeats. A sound, like fabric brushing against my bedroom door, had me holding my breath, utterly motionless. Eventually rising, I eased the door open. The hallway stretched away, dimly lit by a single weak bulb at its terminus. Across from my door hung a tall mirror encased in carved wood. I ventured out, each step a careful negotiation, with the complaining floorboards straining to pierce the gloom. My reflection stared back, the open bedroom door yawning behind it in the glass. A tightness constricted my chest. Then a whisper, less sound than a breath exhaled near my ear, the words indistinct. I whirled, nothing. Turning back to the mirror, my reflection seemed unchanged, yet I perceived a flicker in the background depths of the glass. A shadow slipping along the reflected hallway wall where no shadow could be. The following days became a campaign of concealment. Old sheets, towels, salvaged cardboard, anything to blind the ubiquitous glass eyes. Yet the coverings resisted. They slipped, fell. Nails refused purchase, tape peeled back like shed skin. It felt perversely as though the mirrors themselves shrugged off my efforts. More were unearthed in improbable locations, lurking behind a closet door, secreted in a shadowed alcove beneath the stairs. Each discovery was a fresh stab of anxiety. The sensation of being watched intensified, a constant pressure on the back of my neck, regardless of my location. One afternoon, a heavy thud echoed from a storage room down the second-floor corridor. Opening the door, I found a large rectangular mirror lying face up on the dusty floorboards. It hadn't been there yesterday. I distinctly recalled propping it against the wall. Its surface possessed an antique waviness, distorting reflections. Crouching, I saw my face ripple, features momentarily fluid, and then, behind me in the glass, something moved. A rapid blur arcing from one corner to the other, humanoid but too swift to resolve. A chilling numbness crept into my hands. I jolted upright, spinning around. The room held only derelict furniture, a broken chair, cobweb-laced boxes, an old dresser. My heart hammered against my ribs. Breathing raggedly, I decided the mirror had to be moved. Grasping its edges, I wrestled it into the hallway. It felt unnaturally heavy, a leaden thing straining my arms. I leaned it against the wall just outside the storage room door. A knot of dread tightened in my gut. I didn't want it with me, yet leaving it prone felt worse. Stepping back, I heard a soft, grating scrape. I turned. The mirror was tilting slowly, deliberately, stopping at an angle that captured a sliver of the corridor. I left it, unnerved, resolving to haul it to the basement later. That evening, seeking refuge in the living room, I attempted television. The screen offered only a blizzard of static, a visual scream that grated on my nerves. I killed the power. Silence rushed in, amplifying the house's subtle pops and groans, the shifting language of old timber. The mirror above the fireplace drew my gaze. I switched on another lamp, hoping to dilute the shadows. Perched on the sofa, my attention oscillated between my phone's small glow and the large, impassive glass. Abruptly, a faint form materialized on its surface, occupying the space where the hallway entrance behind me should be reflected empty. My muscles seized. Sweat prickled my brow. Rising, I approached the fireplace, compelling myself to look. My reflection was pale, hair askew. Behind it, the reflected doorway remained empty, yet the periphery of the glass seemed to shimmer, hinting at movement just beyond the frame. I recoiled, averting my eyes. The tension in the house was a physical weight, the possibility of not being alone evolving from suspicion to a near certainty. Logic warred with instinct, no forced entry, no footprints, no tangible proof of another presence. Only the mirrors and the unsettling anomalies within them. My nights dissolved into restless anxiety, punctuated by waking in cold sweats to phantom noises that evaporated upon investigation. After a week besieged, I tried a new tactic. Blackout curtains, thick and dark, purchased from town. I cut them, tailored them to the larger mirrors, securing them with determination and nails. Hammering against the frames produced an odd resonance, a tremor that felt less like simple vibration and more like recoil. Finally, the major surfaces were blinded. A fragile sense of relief settled over me. Perhaps I dared to hope I could reclaim my sanctuary. The following morning shattered that hope. 2 curtains lay pooled on the floor, ripped violently from their moorings. The nails remained, bent askew, mute testimony to the force applied. Fury and bewilderment surged. I'd heard nothing. The house remained locked, secure. No broken windows, no disturbed dust outside. Yet the fabric was torn. Grimly, I set about rehanging them, pressing the heavy cloth against one mirror. An icy draft, inexplicable with all windows sealed, feathered the back of my neck. I hammered the nails deeper this time, arms aching, sweat stinging my eyes, half expecting a hand to emerge from the glass. Nothing overt occurred. I finished, moving to the next afflicted mirror. Later, near midday, I slumped onto a bench in the foyer, rubbing my strained shoulder. My eyes fell upon the large oval mirror near the front door. I had draped it with a heavy blanket. The blanket was gone. It lay crumpled in a far corner. A cold paralysis gripped me. My heart began a frantic pounding. All my efforts were futile. Something in this house wanted the mirrors uncovered. The skin on my scalp prickled. Wiping my damp face on my sleeve, I retrieved the blanket, forcing myself to re-drape the mirror. This time I used thick duct tape, sealing the edges with grim finality. I braced for the sound of tearing, the sight of the blanket flying off again. Silence. For now. Then a delicate metallic clinking drifted from the upper floor. Faint, yet distinct enough to make me freeze. I ascended the stairs, placing each foot with deliberate care. Reaching the landing, the sound ceased. The hallway stretched before me, steeped in the weak glow of the single overhead bulb. The mirror I'd moved from the storage room remained angled against the wall. Approaching cautiously, I saw my reflection warped, elongated, a funhouse distortion. My stomach clenched. Leaning closer, my face in the glass seemed subtly wrong, features subtly rearranged. And then, reflected behind me, movement flickered. I lurched back, spinning. The corridor was utterly empty. Frustration warred with rising panic. My breathing hitched. Pacing now, scanning doorways, I heard another sound, a low scrape like something being dragged. Turning a corner, I confronted a mirror I hadn't noticed before, perched on a small wooden stand at an intersection of halls, reflecting both converging passages. It was uncovered. Dust filmed its edges, save for the center, where a single clear handprint marred the glass. I stared. It wasn't my hand. Larger, the fingers spaced differently, an alien palmistry. My pulse throbbed in my ears. I tried wiping it with my sleeve, but the print remained, a ghostly impression seemingly pressed from within the glass itself. I peered down the left hall, then the right, vacant. Backing away slowly, unwilling to meet my own gaze any longer, my legs felt unsteady. A simultaneous chill and sweat broke over me. Retreating felt imperative. I hurried back towards the stairs, casting glances over my shoulder, half expecting a pursuing reflection, a shape materializing at the edge of sight. Downstairs, I grabbed my jacket and stepped onto the porch, gulping the cold, damp air. The overcast sky pressed down. The wind sighed through the skeletal trees surrounding the property. My mind raced. Hire someone to remove them all? Smash them? A tremor of fear accompanied that thought. What might smashing them unleash? And the paradox of my nature. Loathing intrusion, yet terrified to expose anyone else to this presence. As twilight bled across the sky, the inevitable truth asserted itself. I had to go back inside. This house was mine now. Abandonment felt like surrender. Once inside, I forced myself on a patrol, checking the mirror coverings. Some held fast. Others had slipped, sagged, bore subtle signs of tampering. My nerves were raw filaments. Each mirror felt potent, charged with an unseen energy. My attempts at suppression seemed only to agitate whatever resided within them. Night has fallen completely. Exhaustion weighs me down. I've retreated to the master bedroom, secured the door, left a small lamp burning defiance against the shadows. I sit now, perched on the edge of the bed, scribbling these words onto a notepad, an anchor in the encroaching strangeness. Soft scraping sounds echo from the hallway beyond the door. My gaze keeps snapping to the mirror across the room. I covered it meticulously hours ago with a thick sheet, yet I can see the corners lifting, subtly, as if tugged by invisible fingers from behind. My own hands tremble as I write. My mouth is parchment dry. Swallowing feels like a conscious effort. What dwells within these countless panes of silvered glass? Why this house became their vessel remains terrifyingly unknown. All I grasp is the suffocating sense of entrapment, of perpetual scrutiny. With every blink, I fight the image of a figure standing just behind me, patient, waiting. Holding onto sanity is a conscious act. I can only hope to endure, to find a way to coexist or escape. For now, I listened to the darkness breathe and creak around me, increasingly uncertain if the face staring back from any polished surface is truly my own. The cold clings to memory, a damp, subterranean thing. Late light slanted through the grimy window well that afternoon, dust motes dancing in the weak rays as I wrestled with the bowels of the house. Days I'd spent down there, solitary in the cramped cellar, chipping away at its history, trying to conjure a workshop from the neglected storage space. Under the stuttering glare of a bare bulb, I tore down water-stained panels, scraped back generations of flaking paint. Grit coated my skin. The air hung thick with the musk of old earth and decay. My clothes felt like a second, heavier skin. It was near a low-slung support beam in the deepest corner that I saw it. A fissure spiderwebbing across the poured concrete. Insignificant at first glance, a mere hairline fracture in the rough, gray expanse. But tracing it with a grimy finger, I felt an impossible draft kiss my skin, frigid as expelled breath from a tomb. The fine hairs on my forearms lifted in unison. Instinctively, I pressed my ear to the cold stone and heard it, a susurrus, low and indistinct, yet somehow shaping itself around my name. Elias. Drawn out, each syllable savored. I recoiled, heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. Elias. My name, uttered with slow deliberation. I killed the power sander, the sudden silence amplifying the frantic thud in my chest. Above, the furnace breathed its low mechanical sigh. Beyond the narrow window, the muted rumble of city life. But from the crack, the whisper coiled again, fainter this time, drawing back into the wall's hidden depths. It spoke of things buried deep within me, echoes of my past, the precise year I'd sought refuge in this inherited house, the unspoken reasons my brother's calls went unanswered. My mouth felt dry, packed with dust. A single drop of sweat traced a path down my neck, disappearing beneath my collar. A trick of sound, I insisted. Old plumbing, perhaps, transmitting whispers from elsewhere in this peculiar house. My late Aunt Alara, from whom I'd inherited it, had been a woman of distances and silences. I barely knew her. Rumors lingered about the basement, whispers of its former life as some kind of shelter, stories I'd dismissed. Until now, the voice hummed, a low thrum against the concrete, weaving predictions through its murmurings, secrets yet to unfold. A deluge, it promised for the coming Thursday. A visitor cloaked in midnight knocking at my door. It spoke with unnerving certainty, sometimes mimicking my own cadence so perfectly, the sound seemed to originate inside my skull. I needed air. Fleeing the cellar, I took the narrow stairs 2 at a time, emerging into the relative brightness of the kitchen. Water, gulped straight from the tap, did little to cool the panic. Logic, I commanded myself, breathing hard. Voices in walls? Absurd. Exhaustion, surely. The solution was simple. Seal the fissure. Patch it with filler. Erase the anomaly. Armed with trowel and compound, I descended again. The atmosphere below had shifted, grown denser, the very walls seeming to press inward. Kneeling by the crack, I aimed my flashlight into the darkness. The beam snagged on something unexpected, a faint luster deep within the fissure, like the wet glint off polished obsidian or dark metal. Leaning closer yielded nothing more than shadows. With determined strokes, I began forcing filler into the gap, pushing it deep, wanting only to silence whatever lay beyond. The instant the compound met the voice surged, louder, straining against the nascent barrier. It turned venomous, mocking me in my own voice, parroting phrases I muttered only in solitude during bleak moments, turning my private doubts into accusations. My hand trembled. A blast of glacial air erupted from the narrowing crack, sharp enough to steal my breath, cutting through my thin shirt. I scrambled backward, the trowel clattering to the floor, the job left unfinished. Sleep offered no escape that night. Dreams brought processions of figures down the upstairs hallway, their heads smooth, featureless ovals like porcelain eggs. They drifted towards my bed, extending limbs that bent unnaturally, their long fingers reaching. I woke slick with sweat, lungs constricted, convinced I could still feel the phantom brush of their touch against my skin. 3 a.m. The house was a tomb of silence. Sleep was impossible. I paced the living room until the gray light of dawn seeped through the windows, the voice and the crack replaying in my mind. Peace had become a foreign concept since I'd started disturbing the basement's slumber. The following afternoon, a new strategy. An old, heavy bookshelf dragged and wedged against the offending section of wall. Concealment as cure. The moment it settled, a distinct pressure bloomed at the base of my skull. The voice resumed, muffled now but relentless. It spun tales I couldn't disprove, dredging up forgotten humiliations, choices I'd long tried to bury. Then came fresh prophecies, the slow rusting of my tools, a pipe destined to burst in the upstairs bath, an envelope bearing ill tidings, all delivered in that same steady, knowing tone. I threw myself into other tasks, securing loose stair treads, checking the ancient fuse box, clearing away cobwebs thick as shrouds. But the voice insinuated itself into my thoughts, sometimes a subtle undertone I mistook for my own internal monologue, other times a sharp, demanding chant of my name, laced with derision. Behind a stack of forgotten crates, I unearthed a leather-bound ledger. Inside, Aunt Alara's spidery script documented notes about a previous occupant, a relative I'd never known existed. She wrote of a peculiar door within the basement wall, sealed decades ago. Her handwriting grew erratic, the ink faded. One line leaped out, chilling me despite its vagueness. It's not trying to heal, it's trying to become. I slammed the book shut, pulse frantic. Coincidence felt like a flimsy shield. That evening, desperate for a normal human connection, I tried calling Leo. The line crackled and died repeatedly. A text followed. Ever hear weird sounds through walls? Silence answered. Catching my reflection in the hallway mirror, I saw the dark smudges beneath my eyes, the rigid set of my jaw. For a disorienting second, the reflection's lips seemed to move independently of mine. A silent mouthing. I nearly cried out, nerves frayed to snapping point. Fatigue, I told myself fiercely. Just fatigue. One last descent. Flashlight and a small hammer this time. If there was something tangible back there, I had to know. I carefully chipped away at the edges of the fissure, widening it just enough. The flashlight beam struck that same deep gleam, something smooth, reflective, but warped, like gazing into antique mercury glass. A distorted sliver of my own eye stared back, pale and unnervingly alien. Nausea churned. The voice breathed my name, Elias, and the temperature plunged again. It wasn't hostile, not in a physical sense. It sought ingress, weaving itself into the fabric of my awareness. My breath grew shallow. With trembling hands, I hammered a small plank of wood over the opening. A thin, high wail resonated not in the air, but directly within my skull. My fingers went numb, a cough tearing from my throat as if I'd inhaled ice shards. The choice loomed: abandon this house, this inheritance, or confront the presence in the wall. But this was my anchor now, months of sweat equity poured into its bones. Where else could I possibly go? Flee from a whisper? I resolved to seal it utterly. Cement, wire mesh, primer, paint, an arsenal gathered. I worked into the night, shirt plastered to my back, heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Each trowelful pressed against the void elicited a sibilant hiss of protest from the voice. It recited my failures, replayed cruel words I'd flung at those I loved. My legs threatened to buckle, but I persisted, layer upon meticulous layer, until the crack vanished beneath smooth, sterile paint. Dawn found me slumped on an old crate, utterly spent. The cellar felt marginally warmer, the silence profound. I waited, braced for the voice's rage. Instead, only a faint, receding echo remained, almost plausible as mere memory. A week unfurled in fragile calm, I skirted the basement, though a phantom chill seemed to emanate from the floorboards. Sleep remained troubled by faceless visitors, but they seemed more distant now, their forms less defined. I allowed myself to believe it was finished. Until yesterday, downstairs again, checking for dampness. The wall stood seamless, inert, but then my gaze fell upon a patch of concrete floor where spilled water had evaporated, leaving a faint, reflective sheen. My own image looked back, and its lips parted though mine remained closed. It regarded me, head tilting slightly, and behind its shoulder, almost imperceptible, lurked another shape, featureless, indistinct, yet undeniably watchful. The cold snapped back, visceral and immediate. My heart seized. I stumbled backward, boots scuffing the floor, unable to tear my eyes away until my hand struck the stair railing. The reflection's mouth moved again, silently forming my name. I bolted, fleeing up the stairs, the frantic hammering in my chest threatening to crack my ribs. Now I sit, writing this, hand unsteady, the door securely locked. The pressure behind my eyes returns, a low, resonant hum. My tongue rasps against dry lips, tasting phantom dust. A towel shrouds the bathroom mirror. My own face has become unbearable. Every polished surface seems poised to betray me, offering glimpses of something that lingers, waits, whispers. I feel it settling within me, not yet whole, but making itself comfortable in the shadowed corners of my consciousness. The physical breach is sealed, yes, but a terrifying conviction grows. I only provided it with a new vessel. My own thoughts feel porous, standing by the kitchen window as twilight bleeds across the sky. Sometimes my reflection smirks when I do not, its lips shaping words just beyond hearing. And then, beneath the quiet hum of the house, a soft murmur, persistent and intimate, calling my name, a chilling reminder that nothing is truly over. That initial evening, I rationalized the sound away. The groaning exhalations of an old structure, perhaps, wind wheezing through ancient heating ducts. Yet wind lacks rhythm. Wind doesn't pause, a measured stillness between the intake and the outflow, like failing bellows gasping for function. And wind, most assuredly, does not learn your name. I'd secured the lease on the farmhouse come October, seeking sanctuary, a quiet theater for the unfolding of my next novel. Rustic charm with modern amenities, the agent had chirped, a euphemism meaning the lights generally stayed on and the internet sputtered just reliably enough for rudimentary searches. They'd glossed the main floor and upstairs with superficial renovations, but the cellar, the stone-lined heart below, remained untouched, primal. 3 days into my tenancy, the breathing began. 11 o'clock at night found me hunched over my desk, wrestling with the architecture of a chapter when the sound percolated up through the floorboards, a faint, liquid rattle. At first, it dissolved beneath the clatter of my keyboard, but once snagged by my ear, it became an undeniable presence. The cadence was horribly consistent, a shallow drag of air, roughly 3 seconds, a 2-second lacuna, then a shuddering release that seemed to snag, to catch midway like the tormented efforts of lungs drowning from within. I rose, prowling the ground floor, pressing an ear to the metal grates of the heating vents. Near the basement door, the sound amplified. I twisted the knob, pulling the door inward, and stood poised at the precipice of the stairs, listening. Abrupt silence fell. I slapped the light switch. A naked bulb flared downstairs, casting harsh, jaundiced light. Nothing stirred within its glare. "Is anyone there?" My voice, an alien intrusion, bounced off the cold stone. Only echoes answered. Down the protesting wooden steps I went, each tread a complaint. I swept my gaze across the subterranean space. Collapsed moving boxes slumped in one corner. The washer and dryer huddled like pale supplicants against the far wall. A clutch of garden implements leaned against the damp stone. No stray animal, no vagrant, nothing remotely capable of producing that sound. Old pipes, I told myself, a flimsy shield against the unease. I retreated upstairs. But the following night, punctual as a fever, the breathing resumed. This time, armed with a heavy flashlight, I descended immediately. Again, the moment the door swung open, silence clamped down. An hour I spent meticulously scouring that cellar, delving behind boxes, probing beneath the stairs, circling the hulking water heater. I even ventured outside, beam cutting through the dark, scanning the foundation for some burrowing creature's den. Futility. This morbid ritual persisted for a fortnight. Nightly, somewhere between 11 and 2, the ragged respirations would commence. Ignored, they might continue for hours. Investigated, they ceased instantly. Always that same labored cadence, always that immediate halt upon my approach. I started capturing it on my phone, playing the unsettling audio for the property's caretaker. "Mice in the walls," he offered, though surely mice don't mimic pneumonia's rasping signature at such volume. The real estate agent waved away my growing anxiety. "Old houses groan," she'd said dismissively. An HVAC technician inspected the heating system, pronounced it sound. I attempted to work, to exist around it. Daylight rendered the house benign, almost normal. In the sun's glare, I could nearly persuade myself it was imagination, stress manifesting as auditory hallucination. But dusk invariably brought a cold knot of dread tightening in my gut. I began to circumnavigate the basement entirely, hauling my laundry to the coin-op in town. Plug-in air fresheners bloomed throughout the house, a futile chemical assault against the musty, grave-like scent that seemed to bleed upwards through the floorboards after dark. Last night shattered the pattern. I sat in my usual vigil, trying to weave words together against the backdrop of those wet, struggling breaths from below. The sound had become almost a morbid fixture, unnerving yet horribly familiar. Then it altered. The breathing accelerated, grew erratic. The steady, agonizing rhythm dissolved into quick, shallow pants, desperate and uncontrolled. My fingers froze above the keys. In 3 weeks, the cadence had been immutable. Now, this frantic hyperventilation. The fine hairs on my neck prickled as the gasping intensified, clawing its way louder, then abruptly stopped. The ensuing silence crashed over me, a palpable weight. I remained utterly still, ears straining against the sudden void. My own pulse hammered a frantic drum against the quiet. 1 second stretched, 2, 3, then, threading through the vacuum, a whisper, so faint it barely registered, yet it coiled up from the heating vent beside my desk. Elias. My name. Just my name, exhaled in a voice like desiccated parchment crumbling, like sandpaper drawn over stone. My chair scraped violently as I lurched to my feet. The whisper came again, infinitesimally louder, thick with a chilling intimacy. Elias, I can smell your warmth up there. Panic seized me. I scrambled for the front door, snatching my car keys from their hook as I fled past. Behind me, the basement door groaned open on protesting hinges. The whisper curdled into a low, wet chuckle that seemed to bubble up from the very bottom of the stairs. Elias, aren't you curious to see? I wrenched the front door open and plunged into the November night, stockinged feet hitting the cold porch boards. The frigid air was a shock, but I didn't pause. Sprinting across the frosted grass to my car, my fingers, slick with adrenaline, fumbled the keys, dropping them twice before the lock yielded. As I threw myself behind the wheel, a final glance snagged on the house. The porch light cast a sickly glow on the open front door. Framed within it, the basement doorway gaped, a rectangle of perfect, impenetrable blackness. And within that darkness, something shifted. The beginning of slow, dragging steps, ascending from the depths. I ignited the engine, tires spitting gravel as I tore out of the driveway. I drove without direction, finally pulling into the garish sanctuary of the nearest motel, securing a room with trembling hands and a credit card. I sit here now, committing this to record while the terror remains sharp, immediate. The sun climbed above the horizon an hour ago. I have to return. My possessions remain captive in that house. Clothes, books, my laptop holding 3 months of painstaking work. But a chilling discovery anchors me to this sterile motel room. Reviewing my phone after the panic subsided, I found the voice memo app still active. I'd hit record instinctively when the breathing pattern shifted, desperate for proof nobody would otherwise believe. Just now, I listened. The sound is there, starkly clear. The ragged breathing, the frantic shift to gasps, the abrupt silence. But my name, those whispers brittle and ancient, utterly absent from the recording. Following the cessation of breathing, there are only 3 minutes of pure, unbroken silence. That discrepancy defies explanation. I know what permeated the silence. I know what I heard. But if that parched voice didn't emanate from the heating vent, then it must have originated from somewhere else, somewhere impossibly close, directly behind my chair. I've contacted the agent, declared my lease terminated, effective immediately. Legal threats followed. I remain unmoved. They can confiscate the deposit. They can pursue me for the outstanding rent. No threat, no consequence could compel me to spend another night under that roof. Yet I must retrieve my work, my life packed in boxes. One final incursion under the full glare of daylight. I sit watching the sun ascend, telling myself it's simple. Walk in, grab essentials, walk out. 10 minutes maximum, avoid the basement door, refuse to even look towards it. Yet my mind keeps replaying those dragging footfalls on the stairs, keeps returning to the impossible physics of the whisper, keeps picturing what might have stood silently behind me, close enough to breathe its desiccated words directly into my ear while I sat paralyzed at my desk. Checkout looms at 11. Less than 2 hours remain to galvanize my courage, to rationalize away the impossible, to gird myself for re-entry. But one certainty resonates deep within me. Whatever resides in that cellar knows I must return. It anticipates my arrival, and this time, whispering might not suffice. I feel its presence, even here, miles away in this brightly lit room, a patient, famished awareness that has grown stronger with each passing night. It knows my name. Perhaps acquiring a new laptop is the more prudent course. Epilogue for those inquiring. I did retrieve my belongings, though not in solitude. 2 friends, bless their skeptical courage, accompanied me in the bright clarity of midday. The basement door remained ajar precisely as I had fled it. The house itself smelled ordinary, the pervasive mustiness strangely absent. We extracted my vital possessions in a tense 15 minutes. No one ventured near the cellar steps. I formally broke the lease and retreated to the relative anonymity of the city. The agent's legal posturing eventually dissolved after 3 subsequent tenants vacated the property within weeks of moving in. The last I checked, the farmhouse lingers on the market, advertised as recently renovated, rustic charm intact, price significantly reduced. Occasionally late at night, when my apartment settles into profound quiet, I find myself listening, straining for that familiar labored breathing. Thus far, silence reigns, yet sometimes poised on the edge of sleep, a specific memory surfaces, jolting me upright, heart hammering against my ribs. I never volunteered my first name to the real estate agent. All correspondence was digital, all documents signed E. Vance. How then did the entity in that cold stone basement know to whisper Elias? Again, the heavy velvet drapes in Arthur Pendleton's front room quivered, a barely perceptible tremor against the glass. 3 a.m. A sliver of ice feathered down my vertebrae. For the 3rd consecutive night, his spectral outline had materialized there, a sentinel gazing into the impenetrable suburban dark. Something coiled and unwell resided next door, and a premonition whispered that the placid skin of our street was about to rupture, revealing truths best left buried. 5 years I'd shared a property line with Pendleton. 5 years of nodding acquaintance, of him securing my home during my travels, of me clearing his snow-choked drive or taming his unruly summer lawn. A quiet covenant of neighborliness. Yet recently, the equilibrium had shifted, subtly at first, then with alarming speed. It began almost imperceptibly, the gleam of new formidable locks studding every door, every window frame. Then the cameras manifested, tiny cyclopean eyes with unnerving crimson glints, sprouting from eaves and angles like metallic fungi. Initially, I dismissed it, the anxieties of advanced age, perhaps. Pendleton was nearing 80 after all, and solitude can breed phantoms. But the nocturnal vigils commenced. Rising in the dead hours, drawn by thirst or restlessness, I'd spy him, rigid at his window, gaze fixed on some unseen point in the blackness. Daylight brought no relief. He'd dart from his sedan to his front door with frantic sideways glances, a man anticipating ambush from the petunias. Once I hazarded a conversation, a casual probe about his apparent unease. The reaction was galvanic. His eyes dilated, a flicker of raw terror, igniting their depths before being ruthlessly banked. A strained chuckle escaped him. Ah, well, one must exercise caution in these times. Mustn't one? Before another word could be uttered, he'd vanished inside, the heavy door thudding shut with unnerving finality. That exchange echoed now, a discordant loop in my mind, as I stood sentinel at my own window, mirroring his shadowed form. Logic screamed for retreat, for the oblivion of sleep, for the simple act of minding my own affairs. But a deeper, more insistent current held me fast. I needed illumination. The following morning, feigning illness, I abandoned work. Precisely at 10, punctual as celestial mechanics, Pendleton departed for his daily grocery run. My moment arrived. Guilt gnawed as I slipped across the dew-slicked divide between our lawns. My heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Merely checking, I rationalized ensuring his welfare, a flimsy justification for the line I knew I was crossing. The front door yielded with astonishing ease, swinging inward on silent hinges. I hesitated on the threshold, engulfed by stillness. The air inside was dense, redolent of aging paper, dust motes dancing in stray sunbeams, and an underlying unplaceable tang. A veneer of normalcy held sway. The meticulously arranged living room, ancestral faces smiling from the mantelpiece, a half-drunk mug of coffee cooling on an end table. Yet, venturing deeper, the illusion frayed. Miniature lenses winked from unexpected places, concealed within picture frames, tucked into shadowy corners, one artfully disguised within a potted fern. The kitchen surrendered stacks of notebooks, filled cover to cover with cryptic notations, columns of numbers, precise timings. My hands trembled as I ascended the staircase, a silent plea forming in my mind for a simple explanation. Perhaps he harbored a late-life passion for espionage thrillers, or extreme home security was his newfound hobby. The upstairs corridor presented a series of closed doors. The first resisted, locked fast. The second, likewise. But the third, situated at the hall's terminus, groaned open at my touch, the sound amplified unnaturally in the profound quiet. I stepped inside and froze, breath catching in my throat. Darkness reigned, punctuated only by the cold electronic radiance of myriad computer monitors. Dozens upon dozens, they cast an eerie glow, each screen displaying a distinct vista, Our street viewed from multiple angles, the intimate interiors of neighboring houses, glimpses into local shops. A sickening wave washed over me as comprehension dawned. Live feeds, an omnipresent surveillance network blanketing our entire community. And there, stark and undeniable on one central display, was my own living room, captured in unflinching detail, my thoughts fractured. Pendleton, the gentle elder who'd welcomed me with warm cookies years ago, was orchestrating a clandestine watch over us all. But the motive, what conceivable purpose could this intricate spying serve? Lost in the vortex of shock, I nearly missed it, the distinct sound of the front door opening below. The click jolted me, adrenaline surging through my veins. Pendleton, he'd returned prematurely, and I stood exposed in the heart of his secret observatory. A frantic scan revealed scant options for concealment in the sparsely furnished room. The closet, my sole refuge. I scrambled inside, pulling the door almost shut, just as deliberate footsteps began their ascent. Through the narrow gap, I watched Pendleton enter. He moved with an air of practiced routine, settling before the console, fingers flying across the keyboard with quiet intensity. I held my breath, each inhale a potential betrayal. Time stretched, measured in the frantic pulse hammering in my ears. He worked, occasionally murmuring indecipherable comments to the screens. Finally, after an interval that felt like geologic time, he rose and departed. I waited, straining to hear his movements fade before daring to emerge. My legs protested, cramped and unsteady, my heart still a frantic bird against my ribs. Escape was paramount, yet the enigma held me captive. I crept towards the monitors, eyes darting across the mosaic of stolen lives. Then I saw it, a document minimized on one screen. The header blazed. Operation Neighborhood Watch, Surveillance Report. As my eyes devoured the text, disjointed fragments began to coalesce. Pendleton wasn't merely succumbing to age-fueled paranoia. He was a ghost from a former life, an operative steeped in intelligence craft. The report outlined a mission: continuous monitoring of the vicinity for emergent threats. Threats against what? The deeper I read, the denser the fog of confusion became. Suddenly, a firm hand clamped onto my shoulder. I spun, gasping, to find Pendleton directly behind me. His gaze transformed, now glacial and unyielding. "I had hoped," he stated, his voice unnervingly devoid of inflection, "it wouldn't require this. I've always found you agreeable, you understand. But curiosity left unchecked breeds peril." My mouth opened to protest, apologize, plead, but sound refused to form. Pendleton emitted a profound sigh. "An explanation is owed, I suppose," he conceded, gesturing towards the chair before the console. "Be warned, however, once this knowledge is yours, retreat is impossible." For a fleeting instant, flight seemed plausible. But where? And who would credit such a fantastical tale? Slowly, compelled by a force beyond reason, I sank into the seat, my gaze locked onto his inscrutable face. He began to speak, and as the narrative unfolded, layer by astonishing layer, the very foundations of my perceived reality shifted and cracked. Pendleton wasn't just watching our neighborhood. He was its appointed guardian. Protecting it? Yes, from forces, entities, dangers that defied conventional understanding. Our tranquil suburban enclave, it transpired, rested atop something of immense value, something intrinsically hazardous. A secret, powerful factions would commit atrocities to possess. Pendleton's lifelong charge had been to ensure its continued concealment, to preserve the fragile peace overlying profound depths. "But why reveal this to me?" I managed, my voice a rough whisper when he finally paused. "Why not simply eliminate the complication?" A flicker of something akin to warmth softened Pendleton's features. "Because time erodes even the most vigilant," he replied. "This burden, it grows too heavy for one man. I've observed you across the years, awaiting the opportune moment. You possess keen perception, intelligence, and crucially, a genuine investment in this community. I believe you are prepared to inherit this responsibility." My mind reeled, struggling to assimilate the hour's cataclysmic revelations. A primal urge screamed to reject it all, to flee back into blissful ignorance. Yet, as my gaze drifted back to the monitors, to the familiar faces of those I lived amongst, shared pleasantries with, cared for, I recognized the impossibility of abdication. What must I do? The question escaped my lips, seemingly of its own volition. Pendleton allowed himself a faint smile, the tension visibly easing from his frame. "Firstly," he declared, "your home security requires significant enhancement. You'll find yourself needing considerably more cameras." Leaving Arthur Pendleton's house that afternoon, the familiar sunlight seemed attenuated, the world cast in slightly darker hues. Yet intertwined with the dread was an unfamiliar sensation, purpose. I was no longer merely a dweller on this street. I was its custodian, now ensconced within my own nascent command center. Bathed in the cool cathode glow, I maintained the vigil, safeguarding our shared perilous secret. Occasionally, on a flickering screen, I catch a reflection of my former self, untroubled, oblivious to the currents swirling beneath the placid surface of our lives. A pang of nostalgia for that lost innocence sometimes surfaces, but predominantly, gratitude prevails. Gratitude for the terrible truth, because in this intricate hidden world, knowledge is not simply power, it is the bedrock of survival. The instant my feet met the earth beside the car, a constriction seized my chest. The air hung thick, saturated, redolent of aged timber and the deep, damp decay of fallen leaves. Perched precariously at the lip of a steep trail, my friend's cabin huddled beneath sentinel pines, their needles near black against the fading bruise of the late afternoon sky. Above us, the mountain's peak vanished into slow, swirling vortices of fog. Relaxation, I reminded myself, the purpose of this journey. Yet my stomach roiled. Fatigue from the long drive, I rationalized, though an undeniable disquiet emanated from that looming massif. Silas, my host, materialized beside me, a hearty clap landing on my shoulder. "Get inside," he urged, his voice cheerful against the encroaching gloom, "before this mist swallows us whole." Wordlessly, I followed him onto the narrow porch, its ancient planks groaning a weary protest beneath our weight. The interior was compact, bordering on claustrophobic. A small living area bled into a tiny kitchen, flanked by a single bathroom and 2 sleeping quarters. Silas declared he'd been escaping here most weekends, extolling the virtues of the view, the profound clarity found in its utter isolation. My gaze drifted over dust-laden shelves, traced the hesitant flicker of the overhead bulb, lingered on the heavy, drawn curtains. A staleness permeated everything. Still, I forced a mask of casual ease. We deposited my duffel in the spare room, then settled at a scuffed table for a simple meal. Through the window panes, I observed a film of condensation, odd given the moderate temperature. "The fog here," Silas explained nonchalantly. "It seeps into every fissure, nothing to fret about." Later, retreating to my room, I anticipated blessed oblivion. Sleep, however, proved elusive. Outside, the wind had gathered voice, a sibilant rush through the high pines. My window, cracked just an inch, admitted a chill draft that brushed my face like cold breath. The cabin itself seemed to sigh and settle with each gust, a rhythmic pattern of creak, pause, groan, pause. I lay staring into the darkness above, consciously attempting to regulate my breathing. Near midnight, exhaustion finally claimed me, my eyelids' leaden weights descending. How long I slept remains unknown. Consciousness returned with a jolt, precipitated by a peculiar coldness tracing my cheeks. An ethereal white vapor, unnervingly tangible, drifted within the confines of the room. I sat bolt upright, blinking furiously, struggling to orient myself. And then I saw it, a presence beside my bed. My heart hammered against my ribs, my mouth turned to dust. A figure, motionless, a strangled gasp lodged in my throat, paralysis rooting me to the spot. The shape was tenebrous, yet I could discern the unmistakable outline of shoulders, a head, arms held rigidly at its sides. It stood sentinel still. A scream clawed its way up, dying soundlessly. Tremors racked my hands, cold sweat blooming on my brow despite the room's glacial air. Fumbling blindly for the bedside lamp, my fingers finally found the switch. Light flooded the small space. In that searing instant, the shape dissolved. The mist lingered, swirling faintly, but the visitor was gone. Perched on the mattress edge, I rubbed my eyes, the frantic pulse in my temples, echoing the frantic beat in my chest. A trick of the light, I insisted internally, a hypnagogic hallucination. Perhaps the altitude, the humidity, some unfamiliar atmospheric pressure conjuring phantoms. Forcing myself prone again, I pulled the thin blanket to my chin, eyes scanning the shadowed corners, until the first gray hints of dawn softened the window. Over breakfast, I ventured the question, had Silas ever witnessed anything unusual in the cabin during the night? He laughed, a dismissive shake of his head accompanying the sound. "It's all in your head," he declared smoothly, citing altitude sickness, dehydration, the fog's notorious capacity for optical illusions. I offered no argument, though a persistent tremor lingered in my hands, my mouth still parched with residual fear. Silas pressed a bottle of water on me, suggesting a brief hike to clear my thoughts. Thinking the crisp air might indeed dispel the lingering unease, I agreed. We embarked on a slender trail meandering through the pines, our footfalls muffled by a thick carpet of fallen needles. Fog drifted in capricious patches, sometimes swirling low about our ankles, then lifting into the dense canopy. I tried anchoring myself to the physical act of walking, the pressure of my boots on the yielding earth, the nascent burn in my calf muscles, the brittle snap of twigs underfoot. The wind persisted, its gusts animating the mist into unpredictable patterns. Silas moved with an easy familiarity, seemingly unperturbed, but each glance upward toward the churning gray ceiling above the trees tightened that knot of pressure in my chest. After perhaps an hour's trek, the path widened into a small clearing, a vantage point reputed for its breathtaking panorama. Today, however, offered only shifting, featureless layers of white. It felt like standing at the precipice of oblivion. The wind howled, a raw, elemental sound, yet visibility was reduced to mere feet. "Best head back," Silas announced, adding with forced levity, "No spectacular vistas in this soup." I nodded, distracted. A faint susurrus had reached my ears, like distant murmuring voices. Straining to listen, I tried to pinpoint the source. It seemed to emanate from the depths of the fog, ubiquitous, surrounding us. Too indistinct for words, yet undeniably human. The sound of a crowd whispering, muttering just beyond perception. "Did you hear that?" I asked Silas. He merely shrugged. "Wind through the pines," he offered easily. "Does strange things to sound when the fog's this thick." I attempted to dismiss it, but as we retraced our steps, the whispering intensified, coalescing into a chorus of overlapping sorrowful cries, not loud but clear enough to raise the hairs on my neck. A sideways glance confirmed Silas remained focused solely on navigation. My stomach lurched. A clammy chill broke across my skin. My pace quickened involuntarily. "You all right?" Silas inquired. A curt nod was my only reply. "Fine," I lied, the panic tightening its icy grip around my lungs. Back within the dubious sanctuary of the cabin, relief washed over me. The stale, familiar scent preferable to the vast, fog-shrouded unknown outside. Silas offered coffee and I accepted, sinking gratefully into a chair at the worn table. He fiddled with an old radio perched near the window, coaxing crackling static and the faint, intermittent voice of a distant station discussing an incoming storm front. It was mere background noise, failing to drown the phantom echoes still reverberating in my mind. Real or imagined? The question plagued me. Later that afternoon, Silas attempted to restore normalcy, suggesting a visit to a nearby waterfall. Feigning fatigue, I declined, and he departed alone. Left to the cabin's oppressive silence, I stepped onto the porch for air. The fog had momentarily retreated, revealing the wooden steps and a patch of rocky ground. Drawing a deep breath, I sought calm. A faint dripping sound drew my attention to the side of the cabin. Water trickled from a rusted gutter, pooling near the foundation, releasing the rich scent of wet earth. Behind me, a branch snapped. My pulse leaped. Whirling around, I saw only the swirling gray embrace of fog and the dark silhouettes of trees. Yet the distinct sensation of being watched prickled my skin. My shoulders tensed. I clenched my jaw, standing frozen for several heartbeats, waiting. Nothing moved. Retreating inside, I secured the lock. As afternoon bled into evening, the sky deepened to an ominous gray. Silas returned, reporting the waterfall diminished to a mere trickle. "Feeling better?" he asked. I responded with a non-committal shrug. He proposed building a fire in the small hearth, an idea I welcomed, hoping the warmth and flickering light might soothe my frayed nerves. We gathered logs, coaxed flames to life, and settled onto the sagging couch. The fire crackled companionably, casting dancing shadows. Conversation dwindled. I watched the hypnotic play of flames, feeling a fleeting semblance of peace, but with nightfall, the fog returned, pressing insistently against the window panes, transforming them into luminous, opaque rectangles. The temperature plummeted. Silas bid me good night and retired to his room. I lingered by the hearth a while longer before finally steeling myself for bed. My room felt colder than before. I ensured the window was firmly shut. Despite this, a thin, insidious tendril of fog crept beneath the door. My heart rate quickened. I jammed a towel against the threshold, a futile barrier. A tightness constricted my throat. Turning off the lamp, I burrowed beneath the covers, acutely aware of my own strained breathing in the profound darkness. Perhaps an hour passed. Then the familiar chill returned, brushing my skin. The towel at the door was visibly damp. Mist was seeping in regardless. I sat up, eyes adjusting to the gloom. At the foot of my bed stood three figures, motionless. Their outlines, though faint within the white haze, were clearer this time. Shoulders, heads. My stomach twisted violently. A scorching wave of adrenaline surged through me. My chest seized, making each breath a painful effort. The acrid taste of metal flooded my mouth. I yearned to cry out for Silas, yet terror sealed my lips. Convinced any sound would provoke them, draw them closer. With trembling fingers, I fumbled for the lamp switch again. Light blazed. The room was empty. The fog eddied slightly, but the figures had vanished. My hand shook as I reached for my phone. No signal, only a mocking blank icon. I clicked the lamp off, then on, off, on. Testing the darkness, testing reality. Sweat trickled down my spine. Nothing reappeared. Eventually I lay back down, but sleep was impossible. My heart refusing to slow its frantic rhythm. Morning found me confronting Silas. My voice strained as I recounted seeing people in my room. His response was unchanged. Illusions, fog, altitude, my mind playing tricks. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, as if my fear insulted his cherished mountain retreat. A desperate urge to flee warred with a stubborn compulsion to stay, to somehow validate my own sanity. Silas left for supplies. I stood on the porch, gazing at the peaks shrouded in their perpetual gray veil. A sudden resolve formed. Taking a flashlight and water, I set off down a different, untried trail. This path proved narrower, strewn with loose rocks and uneven descents. The fog enveloped me swiftly, reducing visibility to a few yards. Silence reigned, broken only by my own crunching footsteps. Then the voices returned. Softly at first, a mere whisper on the edge of hearing, they swelled, rising and falling in waves until I felt surrounded, adrift in a sea of unseen murmurers. My heart pounded, dizziness threatened. Dropping into a crouch, I swept the flashlight beam in frantic arcs. The light illuminated only shifting walls of white vapor. Hello? My voice sounded pitifully small, swallowed by the mist. Distorted echoes returned, interwoven with what sounded like whispered replies, the words frustratingly unintelligible. Raw panic surged. Turning back, each step felt leaden, my boots slipping on the slick, damp leaves. The wind intensified and the voices seemed to rise with it, a mournful chorus swirling around me. Hands trembling, I kept the flashlight beam fixed on the treacherous ground ahead. Stumbling back into the cabin felt like reaching a shore after drowning. I slammed the door, bolting it, pacing the small living room with ragged breaths. My clothes clung damply. A deep chill had settled in my bones. Silas returned an hour later, laden with groceries. I recounted my experience on the trail. Concern flickered in his eyes, quickly masked by his usual dismissiveness. Altitude, cold, illusions, rest, the familiar litany. Defeated, I resigned myself to one final night. Departure would come with the dawn. That evening, we attempted distraction via an old movie on a small, fuzzy television. The poor reception was almost welcome, a static-filled buffer against the howling wind that rattled the window panes. Around 10, Silas retreated to bed. I remained, staring numbly at the flickering screen until my eyelids grew heavy. Entering my bedroom, I saw the floor near the door was damp once more, the musty odor of wet fabric sharp in the air. I checked the window lock, wedged a fresh towel against the threshold, changed into dry clothes and climbed under the covers, leaving the lamp burning this time. I focused on steadying my breath, my eyes burning with exhaustion. Sleep must have claimed me eventually. I awoke to find the lamp still on, yet the room was now thick with fog, a palpable entity. The cold caressed my face again, and the shapes were back. Closer now, at least two stood motionless, their forms disturbingly solid within the illuminated mist, barely an arm's length from the edge of the bed. My scalp prickled, my chest felt crushed by an invisible weight. Thought dissolved into pure primal panic. I flailed for the lamp switch, clumsy fingers missing the target initially. When I finally plunged the room into darkness, the shapes instantly vanished. Flicking the light back on confirmed their absence. My breath came in short, desperate gasps. Sleep was now unthinkable. I remained sitting upright, huddled beneath the blanket, eyes wide, scanning the corners, expecting their return until the gray light of morning finally seeped through the fogged window. By dawn, my eyes were bloodshot, my limbs trembling with fatigue and adrenaline's aftermath. "I'm leaving," I told Silas, my voice flat. He attempted persuasion, suggesting one more night might break the spell, but the cabin's oppressive atmosphere had become unbearable. His disbelief no longer mattered. I packed swiftly, carrying my bag out to the car. Standing beside the driver's door, I cast a final look towards the mountain. The peak remained hidden, swathed in its heavy shroud of fog. That familiar, oppressive weight settled onto the air. For a fleeting moment, carried on the wind, I thought I heard them again. Those distant, sorrowful voices. Nausea churned within me. Forcing the car door open, I slid inside. Silas offered a hesitant wave from the porch. The engine turned over. One last glance at the cabin, a dark shape against the gray pines, and I pulled away. As I navigated the rough descent, a gradual loosening occurred within me. My heartbeat slowed. The tension gripping my shoulders began to ease. With each mile, the fog thinned, relinquishing its hold. Reaching the main highway felt like surfacing into sunlight and breathable air. What transpired on that mountain remains an enigma. Silas would call it hallucination, a product of altitude and isolation, perhaps, but the place hadn't felt empty. It felt aware, watchful, its presence a palpable weight during every moment of my stay. I harbor no desire to return. Even now, the memory of those silent, watching figures sends an icy shiver down my spine. Some places are best left undisturbed, their secrets kept at a permanent safe distance.